warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon. Alhamdulillah, this afternoon I think we've got with us four accomplished panel speakers who have got this challenge of fighting between your tummy and lunch, as well as what they're about to present to you. So I did promise them that let us have good conversations, and also the fact that we're going to help to whet your appetite for lunch. And here is where the conversation is going to be very interesting, taking on from the earlier session that we had, that is to drive the SME ecosystem. And the topic that's been given to us this afternoon is where ideas meet financiers, that is, meet the funds. And we have four very accomplished speakers here, starting with Mr. Jamaludin Bujang, who is the CEO of MAVCAP. And then we've got Mr. Martin Nygate, the founder and CEO of Gente Communications from Singapore. And also I've got Mr. Eddy Lee, the founder of DEF Intelligence USA, and Mr. Ariff Sultan, Asia Regional Director, ID Ratings Incorporated, another one from Singapore. And we have been given about an hour, and what I intend to do this afternoon is really to discuss whether ideas meet funds, because this is FUNDS, not idea meet fund. And this is where the irony is, because I think ideas do want to meet the funds, but the funds probably do not want to meet ideas. And that's where Mr. Jamaludin comes in. I just like to introduce you to him. He's, as I mentioned, he's a CEO of MAVCAP. And he has got 15 years experience as investment analyst, specializing in energy and telecommunications. And he's also the current chair of the Malaysian Venture Capital Association. And for you, Mr. Jamaludin, if I can just ask you a question. We have been tracking, in actual fact, the performance of the venture capital with that of a banking community. And if I were to remind myself, for us, we have been number one for 6 consecutive years, according to the World Bank report. Then, until World Bank decided to change the parameters, and we dropped last year with a big thud from number 1 for 6 years to number 23. And the recent report that was released showed that from number 23, we dropped to number 28. And who's number 1? Number 1 is Sweden, number 2 is Singapore, and number 28 is shared with 3 other countries of our friends. That's Germany, Estonia, as well as Ireland, together with Malaysia. And we move into this non-banking sectors, what you call alternative financing for a lot of entrepreneurs. And I recognize the fact that I would say at least the ecosystem, the financial ecosystem in Malaysia, the VC is a little bit behind. For 2014, loans approved from the banking sector stood at 74.3 billion, and that goes into 140,000 SMEs, as opposed to the VC investment, which is only 318 million. So really the VC industry is a little bit or a lot way behind than the banking sector. And yet here today, we are moving into what you call a non-banking facilities, providing what you call alternative financing for a lot of the entrepreneurs out there. So from your perspective, can I learn to understand, what is it that the VCs are looking for? A lot of them said, hey, the Malaysian companies are not attractive enough. So what really are you looking for that makes them attractive to you, to the VC industry? Perhaps you would like to share your thoughts with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Dato. Thank you, Dato. Thank you for the question. Yes, if you just look at the numbers in terms of funds that we have, VC here in Malaysia is very small. As you mentioned earlier, I think the number is something like 3 to 4 billion only. And if you want to compare the number of, the amount of loan that's been disbursed to businesses, it's like hundreds and hundreds of times over that. but to begin with, VC is very specialized. Not everybody, even on the demand side, some of the entrepreneurs may not like that idea of having a partner coming to their company. And also VC to begin with is actually equity financing. As you know, in any projects, if you want to fund, you probably have a ratio of about 1 equity to 4, loans, for example. So always 1 to 4, or to 5, or probably up to 10, depending on how strong is the company. So naturally, VC in terms of numbers are very, very small in terms of requirement of capital. What we're looking for in VC investment is, without explaining it in much detail, VC has a very specific, in any fund, it has specific lifetime. We operate on a mandate, a few mandates. Generally, it's limited to like 8 to 10 years. And what happens is when we raise money, and after that 10 years, we have to exit all our investments and we have to return back the capital back to our investors, and we'll start all over again. When you do that, you really have you want to focus on certain companies that fits into your mandate. You may want to focus on, that fund can be themed as renewable energy, or telcos, or applications and stuff like that. And a fund of any size, normally the VC fund is about anywhere from 50 million US all the way up to 300 million US. And you are given only like 4 years to invest all that amount before you start think about exiting the investments. So you're probably gonna focus on few selected companies. In a typical size, a fund size of about 50 to 100, you may do about like 10 to 20 investments only. Because the partners in the fund will start to focus on growing the company, not just only invest. They're going to spend a lot of time developing the company, spend a lot of time going down roll up the sleeves and grow the company. Because you want to build value of the company, because that will give you the return that you want, as you promised to your investors. And also, VCs, namely, you're taking a lot of risk when you invest in a company because it's equity financing. You take very minimal stake to begin with, probably about 20 to 40% range. You don't have that much control compared to the entrepreneurs that run the company. But at the same time, you want to work together in the way that you want it. So managing the investment can be quite difficult. But that's where the understanding between the investor and also the entrepreneurs come in. So you want to select companies that share your ideals, that is willing to grow with you, to be a partner in the board, to be a partner in making decisions during the management meeting and stuff like that. So when you go all that, the filters, you'll be a lot of, out of 100 companies that come into you, or you go out and get them, in typical, in average, worldwide average, it's actually about anywhere between 1 to 5%. So only 1 to 5 companies in every 100 get funded by equity. And the balance 95 is mainly because of many reasons. Number one, because the company not there yet in terms of funding. Product, it probably is not developed that much yet. You probably have entrepreneurs that is maybe not up to par. You probably have companies that doesn't have good governance in place. There's so many other things. I'm not saying the 95 are gonna go bust or not gonna make money even. But there's a lot of things that you have to go through the process and before we start picking up the best in those companies. So those are some of the criteria we're looking for. And mind you, out of the 1 or to 5 companies that we've invested, even then also we can fail. So there's a lot of risks that we're taking as well.
Yeah, I suppose it's not easy, but sometimes this is where, interestingly, the topic of discussion where ideas meet funds. This is where the difficulty is where funds did not meet ideas. And for the financiers to actually understand the technology that's coming into being. And this is where it's going to bring me to Martin. Martin is the what do you call it, founder and CEO of Gentic Communications, as I mentioned to you. And he's an architect in the nano business. And I would imagine that people like Martin, who is so specialized in the telecommunications industry, your kind of work is very, very challenging, given the robustness of the evolution of technology that's happening. While you are trying to prepare your papers and to get the next source of funding, your technology become obsolete already. And, and this is where perhaps we want to understand what keeps you moving and what keeps you motivated. And when you meet people like Mr. Jamal here to seek for fundings, for example, do you speak the financiers' language or you make them to understand your language in telecommunications?
Thank you. Obsolete? Our technology obsolete compared to telcos? Please. We're a high-tech company, and we have an app that's a VoIP application. I just want to ask us a question or two to make this a little bit relevant to you as the audience. Can I ask here, guys, how many of you have Androids? Hands up, those got Androids? Thank you. Those have got iOS? Anyone's iOS? Right, and the rest of you? Windows and whatever? Very small. Okay, kind of like half-half between Android and iOS. Let me ask another question. How many of you use Skype or Viber to make a voice call at least once a week? At least once a week?
Me too.
You too? Yeah. Okay. I'll come back to your question in a second or two, but just so you know where I'm coming from, we have a VoIP application similar to Skype and Line and Viber and WhatsApp and WeChat. The difference is that, well, there's two differences. One is that we've developed technology that allows us to operate at very low bandwidth, which means that ours is the only VoIP application that works perfectly well in 2G environments. So, if you try and use Skype on your cell phone, you'll find that even in a 3G environment, it sometimes doesn't work. So ours is the only VoIP application in the world that works perfectly well on 2G. And we've developed a business model that allows us to offer our users not only free calls nano to nano, but we actually offer free calls from nano to any landline, any mobile, anywhere in the world. And that means the end of phone bills. And now coming back to the question about the telcos, it's not about our technology being obsolete, it's about the telcos being obsolete. The world is changing. The world is dynamic. The world is changing. We are a disruptive company. And a lot of the very interesting technology companies are highly disruptives. You look at people like Uber, you look at Airbnb, they're disrupting their own industries. Fintech, the banking industry, is also an industry that's going under immense amount of changes. Their technology, to a large extent, is obsolete. Mm-hmm. How many times have you been able to send an email to your bank and they send you an email back? Banks don't send out emails. They can't figure out how to make it secure, and you can't communicate with your bank with an email. I mean, it's ridiculous. This is the 21st century. The telcos themselves, the technology that they use, the infrastructure they use is somewhat obsolete to a large extent. If you think about a telco, they have two networks. They have a voice network and they have a data network, right? Now they're trying to move everyone from the voice network over to the data network because fundamentally the voice network is dead or dying. Now the telcos themselves have problems because if you imagine the CEO of Singtel going up to his board and saying, hey guys, do you remember that $10 gazillion we spent on the voice network? Yeah, we've got to write it off. They can't do that. And to give you some idea of the technologies that are involved here, Singtel employ about 26,000 people worldwide, and they serve about 140 million subscribers through their various affiliates. Now, I run a company, we have 26 people. We have the technology in place to service 100 million subscribers, right? And we employ 26 people. So this gives you some idea about the obsolescence of the telcos. And it is companies, it's entrepreneurs, and it is innovative startups like ourselves who are disrupting these industries and changing them and changing the dynamics of how business and business models work.
Good. Yeah, I think it's the entrepreneurs themselves out there who knows how to feel the pulse and who know where the movement of the technology is and also understand where the roadmap is heading to post-2030, post-2050. And that's where the young entrepreneurs here becomes very relevant, which brings me to the next speaker, which is Eddy. And Eddy apparently have got that pulse. He knows how to actually understand where to move into and invest. And he has invested in more than 50 startups, predominantly in US, in Singapore, as well as in Indonesia. And it includes areas like mobile health, big data, as well as marketplaces. And his work at Stanford University brings Eddy to become the consulting professor with the School of Medicine that connects academic work to the commercial ventures. And his work at Marvel and Lucent is where it brings him to design semiconductor circuits for high-speed communications. What is interesting is the fact that Eddy is able to know when to go in, which company to go in, feel the pulse, as well as invest in those companies. Now, the irony is the fact that these companies, typically they are startups, they don't have any track record, they only have ideas. Now, Eddy, you are the connector. How are you able to connect all these companies, you've already done for 50 companies, to the financiers, and they're able to scale themselves up and become commercial? Would you like to share that with us?
Thanks very much for the kind introduction. I think it's a huge overstatement on some of the things I've done. I don't think I can beat that even if I introduce myself. Yeah, so my name is Eddy, and over the last 5 years, I was in Silicon Valley, mainly as an investor, heading up the investment practice for Silicon Valley Fund that fortunately also invests in Southeast Asia. Right, so 2/3 of investment in US, 1/3 in Asia. So some of the investments that I've made in Southeast Asia include iMoney, which is a Malaysian company that provides a financial comparison. I was also an early investor in Tech in Asia, which is a tax news website. Right, I did about 4 rounds with them, was a board director in the company. Then it became the first Singapore company to enter Y Combinator before getting investment from SoftBank. I was also an investor in 99.co, which is a serial entrepreneur who previously exited to McAfee. And I invested in the company in the early rounds before he raised money from Sequoia and also Eduardo Severin. So fast forward to what I'm doing right now. I have more recently moved from Silicon Valley, left the fund, and come to Southeast Asia to start my own venture. It will be the new venture that I'm building will be focusing on solving entrepreneurs' problem. The problem that I see in the startup world, especially early financing, is that financiers, which are the investors, and startups often are referred to being on opposite sides of the table. I think that should not be true, because for early stage investors in the seed round to A round, they should be on the same side, because it should be highly operational. The investors should roll out their sleeves and participate in product building, participate in app spend, what's your acquisition cost per customer, what's your lifetime value, what is your legal framework, should we incorporate in Singapore, are you tracking, what is your accounting system, right? Are you having all those things that are in prim and proper condition to allow you to raise Series B? That has to happen, and I don't see that happening from my past few years of investing in Southeast Asia. So that is why I have moved my investment practice to focus in Southeast Asia, and specifically to focus in the health technology and also the fintech sector. The first wave of internet companies coming out of Southeast Asia has been B2C companies, right? What works in US seems to work in China and then work in Southeast Asia. Example is you got Amazon, Alibaba, and then you got Lazada, right? And the next wave of Uber, Didi Dacha, and then Grab Taxi. But more and more we'll see technological-based company that is having this migration, and in shorter periods, what works in the US will quickly penetrate the Southeast Asia market as well. But the twist is the business model. Take, for example, health technology. A telemedicine company that allows you to speak to the doctor in the US, or a booking service company that allows you to make an appointment online in the US. If they try to bring the business model to Southeast Asia, right, they will face some hindrance. First of all, the payer in US is the insurer, right? And the people are experiencing the product, but the payer is the insurer. But in Southeast Asia, typically most markets are underinsured, or many people are not insured at all. So the business model will have to be reinvented to allow a product at potentially a lower pricing, or allow a product where to leverage on the special relationship between child and parent. There are many people who will buy a product for their parents in order to prevent ill health later on. So the business model innovation, when it comes to even health technology, is extremely important. So I do not have a crystal ball to spot what is the next big thing, right? There are many products out there in IoT, in wearables, that have generated a lot of hype, right? But also lead to a lot of disappointment. One example is wearables. Wearables, the first one that came out was Jawbone, Fitbit, and I even invested in a wristband company in 2011. It was the first wristband company around. But 2 years later, in 2013, there were 50 other wristband companies, right? And this company had to reinvent itself by going into a completely software platform where their software is now embedded in every Samsung Gear Fit and every Samsung S4 and later model. It's pre-installed, just waiting for the user to activate. This company is called Lark. It has moved away from the hardware business into the software business. Right? So there's a lot of hype in many products, but what is important is looking at the customer value proposition. We are often seeing that in Southeast Asia, because there's a lack of huge exit opportunities, companies have been comparing their achievement based on how much money they have raised, not comparing how much customer value has been delivered, not comparing how much revenue has been generated. We don't even have to talk about profit, just revenue, right? Those should be the key comparisons in any businesses, not the amount of money raised. So when I look at a business, I always look at the business model. Are they creating value? Who is going to pay for it? If the optimal price for an app is 0 cents, then who is going to pay for the service and the hard work of the engineers? So those are the key things I'm looking for, and I encourage everyone to think about those things when pitching to any investor as well.
So that's very interesting. That means you really have got to look into the customer value proposition. You got to look at the business itself. And this brings us to the last speaker for today. That is Mr. Ariff Sultan, who's the Regional Director of Asia Ideal Ratings from Singapore. He began his career as a software developer and manager for financial software applications with Deloitte. And he's also got 17 years in financial and banking software sales. And he has also become the regional director for Russell Indices and also Dow Jones Indices, where he developed his business for both conventional as well as Sharia index sales. And as you know, that today he is the regional director for Ideal Ratings in Asia. Now, Mr. Ariff, if listening to what Eddy has just said, looking into customer value proposition and also the business model of the business, from your perspective, the solutions that you have provided, how would you think that it would benefit the entrepreneurs as well as the SMEs when they appear before you?
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And good afternoon to all. Well, I want to look at it in a different way, in the sense that since I have interactions with fund managers and investment managers with PE sort of investments besides just fund management, we get into discussions as to where is the PE money flowing. And on that note, I can share with you that we are seeing more and more monies globally that are going to go into SRI, ESG, CSR, sustainability, all of them put in brackets because they refer to almost about the same. And companies that have got clear objectives with any of those sort of like a corporate policies, that's where the money is going to go, at least for the next few years. So that may be a bit different between what Eddy and the others are sharing. Let me share with you the background to what I have just said. Just this week, the Canadian government announced that for all funding into new ventures, companies need to meet into ESG, SRI, sustainability requirements. So if you are a startup and so on, and if you don't have clear guidelines, corporate policies outlined for ESG sustainability, then those monies will not be getting into those ventures as well. So that's coming from the Canadian government, and this new government has just been elected, and most of you would have read the news. So we are seeing governments taking those sort of initiatives. I'm just coming out from another conference in Singapore just the last 2 days, and we had SBI, which is SoftBank, with the Brunei government and their PE funds. And in the discussion was an ESG sustainability SRI discussion. And the regional director highlighted to us that as part of their review of companies as to where they are going to park their PE funds, besides looking at the points that Eddy had and the others had mentioned in this, on this panel, they are also looking as to whether the companies have clear policies on child labor, environmental consciousness, having a woman in the board of directors. These are policies which the SRI and the sustainability objectives are clearly outlined. And so if those objectives are not outlined, then they too may consider other companies that may have got policies in place. So therefore, it's a different sort of a feel that I get when I listen to my panelist members, compared to when I hear PE fund managers who are looking at where they are going to park their funds. As a case in point, you would have realized that with the recent haze that we had in Asia, companies that were, in palm oil and paper and pulp companies that was guilty of the haze in Sumatra, most of their products came off the shelf in Singapore and some of the other countries as a reaction to that they were contributing to the haze. So therefore, consumers are also feeling the same, that they don't want to participate with listed companies that may have participatory companies under their holdings who may be the cause of environmental issues as well. So therefore, we are seeing new developments taking place in Asia where ESG sustainability becomes part of an objective into venture capital funds and also into venture capital businesses. Thank you.
That's very interesting because you're bringing in new dimensions to it about sustainability, about CSR, about child labor, and women must be on board in terms of funding. And when you shared with me about the new Canadian government lineup, I can't help but to reflect the new Canadian Prime Minister. I can see the ladies here laughing. Yeah, he's one man that the ladies are here, led by Dato Azlin, wants to bring the women entrepreneurs over to Canada now. Well, jokes aside, we are moving on to the next part of it, which is another 20 minutes. I'd like to get the thoughts coming in from my fellow panelists here. As we talk about where ideas meet fund, and whether funds really meet ideas and understand the language itself about this banker's mindset, all right? And for the banker's mindset here, I mean, they only look at financial performance. They didn't look into those areas that was just Ariff mentioned about sustainability, about child labor, about the business proposition that Eddy mentioned, about the customer perception index, etc., etc. I'd like to get the thoughts from all my panel colleagues here. There's this trend that's coming in very seriously, which is crowdfunding. And as we talk about crowdfunding and how crowdfunding hopefully will meet ideas, I'd like to get to know your thoughts on this and how, at least from the context of Mr. Jamaludin here, how would you align, you're the chairman of the Malaysian Venture Capital Association, to what the trend is now about crowdfunding?
Thank you, Dato. Well, crowdfunding is actually at least on the equity crowdfunding, it's a totally quite new phenomenon. I mean, Malaysia is one of the first countries in Asia, if not the first, to introduce this. I think soon will be Singapore coming up and Thailand and all that. Even in US and in Europe, it's many companies, countries are introducing equity crowdfunding. Crowdfunding on reward base, yes, a lot. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and stuff like that. I've participated. I'm sure a lot of us have participated in that as well. I'm still participating because I like some of the ideas. I think they deserve my money. I've given them some money. But this is new. I think the thing is what we should have now here in Malaysia, if we want to make it very successful, there should be education, because equity crowdfunding, we're opening up to the public now. Anybody with some money, extra money, or some guts even to participate in equity crowdfunding, it is good idea, but all investors has to know that it is very, very, very risky investment. They must know what they must know the purpose of the money being spent on. They must understand the company, the management, what they want to do, and want to know what's the prospect. So you need a certain amount of understanding of the company or the product before you want to put money into the company. So I think here the education on to the companies as well as to the potential is very important. I think we have to do a lot in educating. The IC also is involved in this. I think it's our role as well to tell them, look, be careful with the money, because the first thing, after 1 year, you don't want everybody to say, hey, look, I put in money and I lost money in this. So it's gonna create a ripple effect. It's discourage a lot of other people who wants to do this, and they will stop doing this. So again, I think that's my view.
Yeah, because I think, as you already said, we are a new player in this game, and for Malaysia at least, it's not yet regulated. We're still learning from some other countries who have begun to regulate crowdfunding, and perhaps Martin would like to share with us in that aspect, whether would you move into that direction and to get funds through crowdfunding for the industry that you are in?
Yeah, crowdfunding the jury is still out. I mean, it's still an immature way of funding startups, and it's very different from conventional forms of funding. It really appeals to people with small amounts of money who get excited by a specific idea and think it's a good thing, and they'll put small amounts of money in. I mean, the fundamental difference here is crowdfunding is many people putting in a small amounts of money, whereas conventional funding is a few people or even one or two people putting in a lot more money. The conventional form of funding, which is a proven model, and it's a much more predictable form of model as well, is something that I think is more sustainable as opposed to crowdfunding. Having said that, crowdfunding does have its place in specific products, mainly products that consumers can understand very, very quickly, as opposed to more esoterical products. I mean, if it's something simple like a Pebble watch or whatever, then yeah, you could probably raise funding. I think the conventional form of funding, which is what my colleagues here are more focused on, we have to understand as well there's different forms. You've got you've got seed, you've got round A, you've got round B, and each of these stages, there's different dynamics that determine the profile of the investor and what they're looking for. So for example, if you take a seed funding, which is a very, very early stage where a company may only just have a prototype of a product and no customers or whatever, what's called the angel investor is usually someone who has a specific interest in that area. They may not necessarily understand it to a great extent, but they really get excited by the thought, by the idea, but particularly by the entrepreneur himself or the team behind him, and think, oh, you know what, this is a good idea. Seed investors tend to invest a little bit of money in many companies. So for example, you might have a seed investor who has a pot of $1 million, and he might invest $100,000 in 10 different companies. One of them will be very successful, one of them will be marginal, and another 8 of them will probably not succeed. But that's the profile, that's the kind of like way that he would invest. But as you go higher up the scale to round A, round B, and round C, the investors themselves become much more professional. So, when you talk about talking the same language, we have to understand as well that investors have different strategies of investment. So, for example, Eddy might invest in IoT and specific and fintech and so on, whereas another group of investors might invest in telcos, and another group of investors might invest in hardware. So, really, if you're looking to raise funding, you really need to first of all identify the profile of the investor and kind of like what type of things they invest in and at what stage, whether they invest in round A or B or C, and so on. But once again, talking the same language, it's at that stage where the investor will understand more about your product and your market and be able to contribute to the development of your company.
Yeah, agree with you, Martin, and I believe that for the investor to really understand the market as well as the ideas that's coming through, that's a big challenge, and that's where, Eddy, you come in. How were you able to actually put them together, understand the market, and also knowing where the product is moving towards to the next few years, and within the context of crowdfunding that we are discussing this afternoon?
Something I must point out is that I've been an investor in the seed and A round, which is typically the first 2 rounds that VCs get invested in. Now, because companies are having bigger and bigger seed rounds, VCs are investing in seed round. Traditionally, they are involved only at Series A, hence the name A. Now we have something called the pre-seed round, where it's angel investors only usually, right? So investors often market themselves as expert in certain categories by showing examples of certain portfolios. I believe that it's the entrepreneurs who are the expert in their company's specific product, what the customer wants, and they should be the expert because they have developed the products for years. They may have a previous company in a similar product. They may have worked in a large MNC while incorporating this idea. So the experts are the entrepreneurs. So how the investor can help or spot the brighter stars among entrepreneurs is, it has to do with seeing the mistakes that some other people have made, being able to draw parallels, and being able to see sudden patterns of what can work, what cannot work, being able to take a helicopter view of the industry and have some idea on where the industry is heading towards, right? So the expert still lies in the entrepreneur. So working together with the entrepreneur is extremely important. So with respect to crowdfunding, the Jobs Act has just been passed, where in US now, very soon, even unaccredited investor, which means practically anyone, can invest in a startup. In the past, only accredited investor can invest in startup, as defined by having annual incomes of 300,000 and above if you are jointly filed, husband and wife filed, or if you have investable assets of 5 million and above. Those are accredited investor. But now everyone can invest. So what does it mean for funding?
Yeah, it's interesting to know that everyone can invest in US. What happens in Singapore, if you might want to share with us?
Right. So in terms of in Singapore, the definition of accredited investor tends to follow the rules of US, right? But the rules for crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding specifically, is still not clearly drawn.
Okay.
There's no clear indication.
Right.
But on the other hand, if you look at angel list, in order to, anyone can actually invest in angel list as long as you fill a form to say that you're an accredited investor. There's no checks that's made.
Okay.
Right? So
Right.
anyone, in fact, a lot of this has been happening.
Yeah.
But the difference here is that there's going to be some impact on how venture investment is made. On the other hand, there's also no impact. There's going to be impact on, I believe, later stage financing, right? Or gaps in the financing cycles, which is, we are seeing a gap in Series A and Series B in Southeast Asia now. So with equity crowdfunding, there's potentially a situation where a seed investor can lead the round, a Series A round, and to be filled by equity crowdfunding investors, right, which take smaller chunks. So that can allow entrepreneurs to get money more easily. But on the other hand, in seed round, where there's an abundance of funds who can provide seed funding, there's probably no change. We are seeing a trend where entrepreneurs who were successful in previous venture have no problem raising money. In fact, they get to choose who's their investor. So with or without crowdfunding, it's still the same thing to them. In fact, it is the investor who has to prove value to serial entrepreneurs and also find a fit for them to be working together for the next 3 to 5 years, that they should be working together, right? So for those instances, I do not think that equity crowdfunding will make a dent. But in
So
certain
it's,
funding gaps,
I suppose here is where the east access to funds, and that's why in the recent report of World Bank in terms of access to credit, you see that US is number 2 and Singapore is number 9. And that brings me to Mr. Ariff at the end there. In terms of, you're the regional director in Asia, I'd like to understand also, what is the perspective of crowdfunding in the Asian region, if you could share with us?
Quite honestly, I'm a bit far off from that subject matter. We don't deal with crowdfunding investors, and so therefore I don't want to give a wrong perspective. I typically meet with fund managers, with investors to create new funds, either on the Sharia side or on the conventional side or on the SRI ESG side. So I may not have the information.
Okay.
So therefore I may pass that.
That's fine, because I'd just like to get the perspective on where the trend that's coming through in terms of crowdfunding today. And this is a very interesting discussion of where ideas meet funds, because as rightly put by Martin, crowdfunding is something that when you have got many, many small funds available and that is being put forward for the entrepreneurs who've got ideas to get access to the funds. We've got the last 8 minutes left, and I'd like to get 2 questions from the floor, if there are any, to the panelists.
First, okay.
I've got one question here on my right. Yes, thank you very much.
Just your name, where you're from, and straight to the question. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Nadia, I'm from Malaysia. Okay, my question is that we have discussed a lot about characteristic or criteria of how business can get funds, But I would like to know any specific industries that as funder looking for in this century. Maybe you can guide us. Thank you.
Would you have your questions to any of the specific panelists here?
I perhaps would like to hear from Eddy.
Eddie. Okay, Eddie, there you go.
right.
The
For
one with the most money.
Right.
I must say that it's extremely difficult to plan for the rest of this century, or 85 years of it. But some of the trends that we can see, and given a fund is only 5 to 7 years, and your startup will also be looking for exits in the next 5 to 7 years, right? There are some trends that we can observe that will hold true. The world's population is heading towards 10 billion people, right? And the world's population, in fact, since 1800s to 2050, where it's predicted to be 10 billion, it's going to increase from 1 billion to 10 billion people. And this is still using the same amount of clean water and food supply. There's going to be scarcity in clean water, scarcity in resources, and this can lead to higher and higher spending on health by various governments. We are really seeing that happening over the last 20 years or so. So there's also another trend that we're seeing, that more and more people are going to be living in urban areas. Cities are going to turn into mega cities, right? And there is a movement towards sustainable technologies within cities. So there are people who call this digital health. Some people call this smart nation. Some people call this sustainable technologies. There are different ways to call it, but looking ahead and predicting these urban living problems, right, and finding solutions for them could be one of the areas that could be very interesting for investors and for any business.
Good, there you go. So watch out, there are lots of opportunities as the world population is going to hit 10 billion, and we talk about the urban sustainable living. Okay, can I invite one more question, please? Yeah. I'll come back to you, sorry. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Hilliard from Chicago in the United States. One of my mentors actually told me not too long ago that one of the criteria that they look for is the fact that there is competition, that there's others that are in their field. Because if not, or if there's a lack of competition, that's a red flag for him. So I wanted to know if this was also something that you all in your experience have noticed as well. Is a lack of competition, does that mean that there's more of an opportunity for it to become more successful in its niche, or is it actually a red flag because there's nobody else for them to compete against?
Is there any particular panelist you'd like to direct your question about competition?
Well, all can answer, but actually probably I would direct it specifically to Jamaludin and/or Martin, if you don't
There
mind.
you go, Jamaludin and Martin.
Yeah,
That's
just
for
very
you.
quickly. Of course, we want to be the first. Competition is good, but you want to have competition. You know, you want to invest in the first company, the best that you can choose, right? But you have to make sure that this company you invest in know how to handle the competition. We ourselves, as a VC, we know how to. You want to know how to beat your competitors. Look, Uber started off like that, with no competition at all. Now there are so many companies doing exactly the same thing. They're still number one now. I think only recently they managed to raise like 100 million. They're planning to raise Series F, 100 million from second. Still doing very well. They're probably going to go for IPO in 2 years' time with a 150 billion valuation. Now, what I'm trying to say is, yes, you want to be the first. Competition is good. You don't want to invest in companies that has no competition, of course, because you want to make sure that the company can also be resilient to market changes.
Yeah, I would say competition is healthy. Martin?
Yeah, I think this philosophy of not investing in a company where they're in an industry that they don't have a competition is kind of like the philosophy they teach you at business school. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. Like my colleague has mentioned, you want to get in very early. You want to get into very early, and someone's got to lead the pack. Someone's got to be the first. So, for example, if you invested in a small company who had a replacement for SMSs 7, 8 years ago, and there were WhatsApp, then you would have made a lot of money. Well, WhatsApp was the first company that did it sustainably. It did it in such a way that it became popular as a replacement for SMSs, for argument's sake. You've got Uber. You've got so many other different companies that are the first in their market. And they don't necessarily have competition or conventional competition. So, people ask me, does my company compete with Skype and Line and Viber? Do my company compete with telcos? We don't compete with Skype and Line and Viber because their target market is the world's first billion. And as Eddy mentioned before, and the population of the world is growing. Our target market is the second to the fourth and the fifth billion of the world's population. And no one else is providing a VoIP application in that market. So I don't necessarily agree. Someone's got to lead the pack. And the guys who are out there in the front are the guys who are going to really be the unicorns in the future.
There you go. Someone has got to lead the pack, and indeed, it has got to be that particular someone that you're going to watch out for. Martin's got big ideas. Zarif, you got a question?
Is this the last question?
Yes, the last question. I know I mentioned two, but I detected Zarif wanted to ask a question. Yes.
Hi, assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Walaikum salam.
And good afternoon. My name is Zarif. I'm actually currently heading this joint venture under the Malay Chamber of Commerce and MTEM, where we're trying to address a specific gap. And I just wanted to get your opinion on whether or not this is a gap worthwhile embarking on, I guess. One of the things that I found as far as the ecosystem is concerned, whether or not it's venture capital funds, whether or not FDIs, which are financial development institutions, are that a lot of these investors or institutions are looking to fund the next big billion-dollar company, or so they're very much interested to go on and see, okay, what could be the next big thing. On the other hand, what we realized was that numerically wise, there are thousands of entrepreneurs that are starting up that are maybe more within more traditional industries, like lifestyle industries, but great innovation is also done in that front. I mean, as far as clothing is concerned, besides material, it's more design based, right? As well as lifestyle industry products. So do you think that perhaps venture capital institutions, right, are probably overseeing these entrepreneurs, perhaps, whereby there's like thousands of them, and with the big grouse is that whenever they go to an investor, they think, it's already it's a clothing industry, so they don't really see the big deal in it.
So Jamal, that's a question for you. You're looking into another perspective here, more on the creative side, on the lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, because on one hand, on one hand there is a lot of funds, right? And they're looking for the next big thing. But on the other hand, there's also a lot of entrepreneurs out there who don't seem to be having access. Perhaps it's not as sexy anymore. Right?
Okay, Jamal.
Well, there are in any economy, so there are a lot of ideas from lifestyle, as you said, all the way to very, very niche tech. Look, VCs, we're just human, and we have certain, as people, we have certain specific skills, a certain area that we're good at. maybe some of them are good, like Eddie, for example, in wearables, for example. So he's gonna create a fund focused on investing in wearables only. The other people who are expert in artificial intelligence. He's gonna set up a fund just focusing on artificial intelligence, many other things as well, renewable, whatever. I think as a country, we should have many funds with different, different focus on the funds. So you cannot have one foundation, can invest everything, because you're gonna dilute all your, your expertise. And as a manager, we have certain areas of expertise. Like I said, you might not be able to pick the right company to invest in. And like I mentioned earlier, in one fund, you're probably going to do 10 to 15 or 20 max investments anyway, because when you start to invest in a company in Series A, you're going to prepare for the Series B and Series C and all that. So you're not going to spend all money in investing at one shot. After that, you're going to left hanging with, you need more money to invest in the follow-on. So I think to answer you, as a country, we should have to develop that ecosystem, get the private sector to come in and participate in funds, and we start focusing on certain areas that the company has strong interest in.
I think for a lot of the entrepreneurs out there, it's just like for the funds, it's just like water everywhere, but not a drop to be seen. It's about access to the funds, that's the issue. And that's the discussion that we've got here this afternoon, where ideas meet funds. What I was trying to attempt to do is where funds meet ideas. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for our panelists here, Mr. Jamal, Martin, Eddie, as well as Ariff.